Hello and welcome to this Astranti video. Now, if you've been studying for BA2 or P2, I'm sure you'll have come across the concept of activity-based costing, or ABC for short. Like every costing system you'll study, it has a mixture of advantages and disadvantages. There will be situations where ABC will be of great benefit, and other situations where ABC is not really suitable and another costing system should be used. And in this video, we'll walk you through some of the key pros and cons that you'll need to be aware of. This is an extract from our video on Chapter 6 of our P2 course. But if you want to see the full video, this can be found on the Astranti website, where you can find a whole range of study materials designed to help you pass your CIMA exams. But for now, let's jump in and consider the pros and cons of ABC.
And we'll start by looking at when it's most effective, because it's not always appropriate to use activity-based costing. And activity-based costing is most effective when there is a diverse product range, where you have lots of different products being produced in small batches rather than big, long, continuous production runs of the same product, because ultimately there will be little difference in it. So diverse product range in small batches where there is a different product and different production methods. It's also important to use it when overhead costs are very high in comparison to direct costs. So for example, in research centers or in the service center, where you have perhaps lots of overheads but very few actual costs to apply to each product. So then you can really see what is driving those overheads, the activities that are driving the overheads. Because if it's just direct material that is driving the overheads, then that is not really going to have a big impact on the result, regardless of whether you use activity-based costing or whether you use traditional costing. And also it's useful where costs are not driven by volume. And this could be due to the complexity or the customization, etc. So in the example that we just looked at using the custom model, the high costs were not as a result of producing more of it because we produced more platinums than we did customs. But it was the specific and the unique things such as the amount of testing, the amount of inspections, etc. that were really driving the cost of it. And it's only then that activity-based costing is more effective. So let's look at some of the pros and cons of using activity-based costing. And before we do, I want you to pause the video and think back on everything that we've looked at so far and perhaps come up with some of your own advantages and disadvantages of it before we continue. So, one of the advantages of it is it allows for improved pricing because we've got more accurate costing and therefore we can price more effectively. Looking back at our example, we saw that under activity-based costing, the custom model was actually selling at a loss. So we now know that we need to sell it at a higher price. There's improved cost control because there is more ability to pinpoint the specific inefficiencies. So again, looking back at our other example, and a huge proportion of the costs for the custom model were driven by the amount of tests, the amount of inspections. So could we reduce the amount of tests? Could we reduce the amount of inspections? Are they inefficient? And as a result, is that driving our costs up? And also allows us to improve the product mix. We can perhaps look at it and think that there are better products that are producing more profit. So if we have limited resources, we can prioritize that. Or we can perhaps just decide to produce more of a particular product provided there is demand for it as it is more profitable to produce. And finally, improved profitability analysis in general. We can see truly what the profitability is of a particular product, and that allows better decisions to improve the overall effectiveness of our decision making. But when there are advantages, there are always disadvantages. And one of the big disadvantages of activity-based costing is it is not easy to implement and it is very time-consuming and expensive. Again, if you look at the example that we produced earlier, yes, we could identify the custom model as being more expensive because we've broken down by activities, by cost drivers, etc. But that doesn't just appear out of thin air. It did in this video, but in reality, you would have to do a lot of research into your production process to identify those cost drivers. And that might be very expensive and it might take a lot of time. And if it takes too long and it costs too much, then you might actually be in a position where the cost of doing the analysis needed for activity-based costing outweighs any benefit you would get from conducting activity-based costing. It's also not required by the International Accounting Standards. The International Accounting Standards say that only an appropriate amount of absorption is needed. So while absorption costing is required under the International Accounting Standards, activity-based costing isn't. Such a comprehensive approach is not necessary for financial reporting purposes. And therefore, if you aren't going to see significant gains from it, you may decide that it's not worth doing because you don't have to do it. And also, it's not always suitable. For the reasons that we discussed earlier when we're looking at where it's effective, this is when it would not be effective. So if overhead costs are not very high, if the volume of overheads is driven by production and the amount of units, then it's not necessary. If there's only one product, then it's not going to make any difference whether you have activity-based costing or not. So if you have a very standardized production process where you've just got one product and overheads are volume related, and the overheads are a very low proportion compared to your direct costs, then it's not going to be suitable. So those are the advantages and disadvantages of activity-based costing. As you can see, there are situations where it is really effective, and in that instance, there is a lot of advantages to using it. But when it's not so effective, it may be considered a waste of time because it's very expensive to implement and it can take a long time to create and gather all the information needed to calculate it.
So we've come to the end of this video, and you should now have a good understanding of the pros and cons of activity-based costing. If you want to learn more about the subject, you can find the full video on our website as part of our full course. If you've enjoyed the video today, why not subscribe to one of our many social media accounts? You can be found on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube, where you can find a wide range of videos on a multitude of topics. Thanks for watching.